How's it going, everybody? Let's talk about simple conjugation and the present tense in Spanish. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to hablar, right? And hablar is the classic verb to speak or to talk. Now, we first have to ask ourselves, do we even have conjugation in English? And the answer is yes, right? So let's take this same example and we're going to use it in English, right? So I speak, you speak, he, she, it speaks, right? So we have that S. We take it from speak to speaks, and that is conjugation. So conjugation in Spanish is more subtle as opposed to Spanish where it's more pronounced, right? And I know you're probably looking at this wall of verbs, this wall of text, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what the heck is this? How am I going to learn this? Well, guess what, guys? We have a system in place that we can use and figure out how to use these verbs, right? I'm not going to lie. There is a memorization component to these verbs, but really you're memorizing the system. So conjugation is a lot easier. All right. And so the first thing that we have to learn here, and the first thing we have to really just burn into our brains is that all verbs in Spanish end in three ways, right? AR, ER, IR. And you're going to see these represented here, and they have corresponding endings, right? So what we're doing is we're taking something like hablar, we are chopping off the ending, and then we're adding the corresponding endings, right? So I went ahead and I left these pronouns out, right? I, you, he, she, you formal, we, they, you all. Left these kind of out as helpers, right? You can go ahead and close those in the settings. And so when we say hablo, right, that O at the end is what makes it I speak, right? So the endings are o, as, a, amos, an. And that is for 99% of all AR verbs, right? So when we have, let's go with another verb like cantar, right? To sing, you're going to see, hey, guess what? We have all of the same endings, right? So even though we're not at the verb hablar, right, to speak, remember the H is always silent in Spanish. That's why I'm not pronouncing that H, right? We're not even looking at the verb hablar, and we still know how to say you speak, right? It's the same ending because it's an AR verb. So hablas, the same way as cantas is to sing. All right. So we're memorizing. Let me go back to hablar. We're memorizing those endings and we're applying them accordingly. Now, something that we need to understand as well is that ER verbs and IR verbs are super tightly coupled, right? They're so similar. And in some cases, in some tenses, they're exactly the same, which is awesome because that's easier for us. So here in the present tense, nosotros is the only form where they're different. And it's very, very small, very subtle, right? Hemos and imos, right? So let's go over to an ER verb like comer, to eat. Very simple. Como, comes, come, comemos, and comen. Now, you may be wondering, okay, Hunter, I get it. Como is I eat. So, yo como, does that mean I eat? And the answer is yes. So in Spanish, we have the option to be more redundant and to repeat ourselves. Repeating yourself in English is an absolute no-no, but in Spanish, you can do it if you want. It's not a big deal. It's part of the language. All of these pronouns are optional. Now, let's go back to hablar really quickly. A good example of when you're going to want to use these pronouns here is, let's say you have a friend that's a boy and a friend that's a girl, and you're trying to say, she speaks Italian really well, right? You're going to want to say ella, right? This is how you're identifying, because you can't really identify if it's a boy or a girl, right? With habla, right? Ella habla italiano súper bien, right? Muy bien. And that's kind of when you're using something like this. You can also use a pronoun to kind of like emphasize, like I, or emphasize you. But if your teacher or your tutor is really emphasizing that you use these subject pronouns, that's a good way to really hook into the language and kind of use these training wheels. I look at these subject pronouns as training wheels, and some teachers may require it. Understand that the language itself does not require these in the majority of the situations. But you always want to do what your teacher says, right? You want to get a good grade there. Okay. So we've already worked with AR verbs, ER verbs. Let's go over to partir, right? To cut, to split, to divide in Spanish. And we have all of these. And as you see with this system, they're all just right here. O, es, e, imos, in, right? So parto, partes, parte, partimos, parten. Very simple. And so, yeah, that's how we're going to conjugate in Spanish. And good news, some of these other tenses are actually easier to conjugate. And so the present tense is, it's definitely not the hardest, but it's actually not the easiest either. So it can get a little bit easier later on, especially with extra practice, it's going to be easier. Now, the last thing I want to talk about really quickly is irregulars. Okay. And before you get too bummed out, we have irregulars in English, right? So if you say I am, you are, he, she, it is, right? Am, are, is, there's no system to that. That is an irregular. You're not adding an S, right? You're not saying like eat to eats. You don't say am, I am, you ams, right? It's you are. It's completely different. That is an irregular. And it's kind of interesting. A lot of irregulars in English map to irregulars in Spanish kind of more or less well, but that's a little more advanced. We'll talk about that later in another video. But here we are. We have ser, right? Soy, eres, es, somos, son. These don't have a pattern. We're not, see, look at this present tense, right? O, as, a, amos, an, where are those? They're not here. This is, or actually that would be, that would be er, ser, right? O, es, e, emos, en, right? Those are non-existent because this is an irregular. And irregulars mean you just have to memorize it. So that's a little bit of a summary of the present tense. Thanks for watching this, and go ahead and give us a thumbs up if you found it helpful. All right. Take care.